From Nathan Buznitz. The written eyewitness accounts were in circulation much too early to be a myth.
I disagree with this, obviously. But if you just look at the situations that we have now in our socio-political sphere, you have this myth of tampering with the 2020 election, and people believe it, even though we can directly show them there was no tampering, there was no election fraud. People are still going to believe that there was election fraud, and it's become so normalized to believe in this myth now that you have people, celebrities or otherwise smart people saying that there was election fraud. So I don't know what it means when you say that it just happened too early to be a myth. Like, these things were written down too early to be a myth. Maybe he'll explain. But just what I've seen in the recent past about this particular topic leads me to the conclusion that people will believe crazy shit if they want to. So it could definitely arise quick. A more academic answer would be look at cargo cults or look at Luddites. Thank you so much there, Robert. I saw, and thank you, honey, for pointing that out. The Luddites, their founder was completely mythical. Ned Ludd never originally existed. But also, if you just look at religions at the time in the first century, at the time of Jesus, you have several cults out there that were built off of mythical things. Another good point here is the UFOs. UFOs developed in less time than it took the Gospels to develop in a mythical way, being that it's completely fiction. The stuff that happened in Roswell, by the 70s, it had blossomed into a full-fledged mythical story. In less time than it took for the Gospels to be written, there are now UFO abductions and crop circles and all this other shit and aliens found at a crash site in New Mexico. So you can't sit there and say, oh, these were written down too early to be a myth. I don't think so. Especially when you consider the fact that they pretty much made up all the information. It kind of makes it look like they were just pulling shit out of their ass. Or, well, they were pulling shit out of other people's asses and then mixing in their own shit with it. Casey said this is getting gross.
This is huge. Why? Because if they had been written much later, all that time, people could have concocted stories. But when the eyewitness accounts were written near the event, there are people who could have busted the authors. Hey!
Hey, that's what I was going to say. Hey, that's bullshit. There's no way anybody could have refuted this thing. But also, this particular point makes it sound like there weren't people that were already trying to argue against Christianity. I'll give you a good example of this. So in Mark's gospel at the very end, he has Jesus, or not really Jesus, but an angel appearing to the women at the tomb saying, oh, Jesus ain't here. Go home, bitches. And don't speak a word of this to anybody. And so they run away. And that's the original ending to Mark, which we may get into the longer ending to Mark and how that got tacked on in the mid-2nd century. But for right now, that's really all that you need to know. Well, in Matthew's gospel, what does he do? He invents Roman soldiers at the tomb. And this was all to stave off the anti-apologetic argument, or the anti-Christian argument that like the body was just stolen. Like the disciples just went in there and stole the body, because the original gospel doesn't have any Roman guards at the tomb. Matthew, upon hearing this particular argument against Christianity, was like, oh, no. There were guards at the tomb, and they were trained Roman ninjas. Okay, you couldn't get past these motherfuckers. When the women got there, the Roman soldiers were knocked on their ass, throwing stars and spears in hand, and the stone was there. And actually in Matthew, you've got an angel that comes down and knocks and bitch slaps the stone away, and then is like, he ain't here, bitches, and then he rises back up into heaven. The fact is, though, is that Matthew's gospel records one of the earliest arguments against Christianity and this notion that Jesus resurrected from the dead. So to say that these were just written too early for people to start to refute, I feel like there's plenty of evidence in the differences between the gospels to show us that people were already arguing against it. Just because the later Christians didn't preserve any of the anti-Christian writing doesn't mean that it didn't exist. And it's very obvious that people were saying it due to the differences that we have. So it would be actually kind of odd if there weren't some kind of anti-Christian writings that were out there that just weren't preserved by Christians. That's happened multiple times as we've seen in what does exist now.